Welcome to this content.
Have you ever been in a bad relationship? A relationship where you love your partner with all your heart, but for some reason, your partner seems to be obsessed with someone else. This someone else could be a classmate, a friend, an enemy, or even a family member. But what if this someone else was God? Welcome to Aditya Learns to Read, a new book review podcast by Discontent. This is episode 1, where I, Aditya, review Kiran Nagarkar's book, Cuckold. The small causes court sits on Thursdays. When father's away, I preside. There were 14 planes to be heard, and I dealt with them all. Albeit as the sun rose to the meridian and then crossed it, I became impatient. The seventh was the most interesting, perhaps because it was not about being done out of money or land, but afforded a change of pace and a bit of humor. With these very prescient words, the book Cuckold by Kiran Nagarkar begins. Prescient because despite being set in one of the most politically interesting and bloodthirsty times in the history of India, the book actually chooses to focus on things that are not so overtly political. In fact, it does offer a change of pace and more than a bit of humor. The book focuses on the relationship between the Crown Prince of Mewar, referred to only as the Maharaj Kumar in the book, and his wife, referred to mostly as Green Eyes as he likes to call her, but the world knows her by a better name, which is Mirabai. That's not to say that the book is completely bereft of any politics. While the central focus of the book is the relationship between this unlikely couple, the book is full of palace intrigue and 16th century geopolitics and all kinds of different political maneuvers inside and outside the royal family. The book even has some of the best battle scenes that you will ever read or even have watched in cinema. Before I get on to talk about the narrative, the themes, and the politics of the book, I would like to talk a little bit about the real people that the book is based on and the place it chooses as its setting. 16th century Mewar and its capital Chittor were some of the most flourishing places in all of North India. The ruler of Mewar and the father of our protagonist, Rana Sanga, was one of the most accomplished kings of northern India ever. Rana Sanga led Mewar to victories across the northern plains of India. First, he captured the kingdom of Malwa, where he defeated the combined forces of the Gujarat and the Malwa armies. After this, he went on to challenge the might of the Lodi Empire in Delhi. The ruler of the Lodi dynasty, Ibrahim Lodi, did not expect this because for the past 3 centuries, the Rajputs had never been this aggressive. Rana Sanga was changing the rules of the game. Ibrahim Lodi took on the Mewar's forces repeatedly, only to lose every single time. Emboldened from the constant success against the Lodi Empire, Rana Sanga turned his eye to Gujarat. And I say eye because he did all of this with one eye, 1 foot, and 1 arm. What's your excuse? It is in the middle of this campaign of Gujarat that the book Cuckold begins. Rana Sanga would eventually go on to fight against the Mughals during their first few forays into India, and he impressed the Mughals so much by his tactics that even Babur called him and Krishnadevaraya of the Vijayanagar Empire the greatest living kings of India. But it wasn't on the battlefield that Rana Sanga faced his toughest challenges. Those were, in fact, reserved for the bedroom. Like a total nerd. While in real life, the palace intrigue of Mewar was much more complex, the book is really just concerned with a few characters from the royal family. Those being, of course, the protagonist, Maharaj Kumar, his wife, Green Eyes, his father, Rana Sanga, his stepbrother, Vikramaditya, who's also the main competitor to his throne, mainly because he's Rana Sanga's son from his favorite wife, Queen Karmavati. Speaking of challenges in the bedroom, as you can tell by the name of this book, it focuses a lot on sexual and marital problems, as is made abundantly clear by a brilliant line spoken by a protagonist, also available at the back of the book, which is, "We were that rarest of couples. Even after years of marriage, we were madly in love. I with her, and she with somebody else." Great line. Kinda gets you right in the balls, doesn't it? Finally, coming to my review of this book, I think the book really shines on its narrative and thematic clarity, especially from the get-go. The passage that I read out at the beginning of this video was from the first page of this book. In that passage, the protagonist is talking about finding an interesting case while he's hearing other boring ones. This interesting case is that of a dhobi or a washerman doubting the fidelity of his wife. Now, those of you with even a basic understanding of Indian mythology will know that this is one of the main conflict points in the Ramayana. This sets the tone for the entire book because the book is centrally focused on the Maharaj Kumar's insecurities about his wife being betrothed to somebody else before their marriage and her continuing to be devoted and loving this other person. This other person, as it turns out, and this is not a spoiler because this is in the first 100 pages of the book, is Lord Krishna. Krishna also happens to be the Maharaj Kumar's favorite god. This feels like a personal betrayal to him, hence the title Cuckold, because the Maharaj Kumar, the prince of this massive sprawling empire, has been cucked by his favorite god. I have to say that the setting and this premise is absolutely a work of genius because the poet Saint Mirabai was an instrumental part of the Bhakti movement which changed the way that Hindus in India looked at their gods and the way they devoted themselves to them. Mirabai, who showed the world that you can be devoted to your gods without having to have any intermediaries in the middle, has been portrayed with utmost elegance and excellence in this book. There is no better way to show a character of that heft and that kind of popularity with such grace. The book has a very intelligent sense of thematic clarity. This is portrayed by the conflicts the characters are going through and also the decisions that they take. For example, while the Maharaj Kumar is incensed at the fact that his wife wouldn't sleep with him and instead has devoted herself completely to Lord Krishna, he himself is obsessed with Krishna's ideology in a very different way. In the book, we see the Maharaj Kumar trying to challenge the concept of Rajput valor. He argues that this whole code of ethics and honor and values in war and treating it as some sort of a romantic gesture is actually pointless because the enemy doesn't consider it that way. Much like Lord Krishna, the Maharaj Kumar doesn't mind deceiving the enemy and doing things that are not considered ethical in war as long as he's winning. Instead, the Maharaj Kumar goes ahead and does things that are completely antithetical to the core values of Rajputs, like making a plan to retreat. He decides that it's better to retreat from your fort and let the enemy have it in order to have a hope to strike back again. This is considered almost blasphemous in Rajput culture. Coming to the narrative of the book, it's a first-person account from the Maharaj Kumar's perspective. He wants to be immortalized in history and that's why he's writing these things. The book is essentially a dear diary for the Maharaj Kumar. In this sense, we get a real good peek inside one of the most underspoken characters of Rajput history. In fact, if you go to the Wikipedia page of Raja Bhojraj, the real guy, you'll barely find anything, or even on Google, there's very little that we know about the guy. And in this way, Kiran Nagarkar finds a character with which he can play around a lot to sort of fictionalize the character in any which way he wants. In fact, I dare say Bhojraj is one of those few historical figures who is identified by the woman he was married to. There are some truly beautiful moments in this book between the Maharaj Kumar and Green Eyes as they come to an understanding with each other. While they may not be a conventional married couple, they truly love each other, and that comes across strikingly on the pages of this book. And it is over here, I think, that Cuckold really shines through and becomes a gem of historical fiction rather than just being a book about palace intrigue and politics. So that was my review of the book, and I'm sure that if you've already read the book, there's a lot that you know that I've missed out on, especially the race for the throne of Chittor, which actually reminds me a lot of the TV show Succession, where Prince Vikramaditya is a sort of Roman Roy and Maharaj Kumar is a total Kendall. Or even the differences in the way that Hindu and Muslim kings would approach their wars and ruling in general. But you know what? This is enough for this time. I'll let you read the book. If you've read this book and liked the review, then please subscribe to us on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on Spotify or other platforms, follow us there and do rate the podcast as well. If you haven't read the book, definitely do give this book a read because I think in terms of historical fiction, I don't think it gets much better. So that's it for episode 1 of Aditya Learns to Read. I reviewed the book Cuckold. If you're liking this new series, then do consider subscribing to our channel. And just to let you know, the next book that I'll be reviewing is The Silent Coup by the journalist Josie Joseph. It's a non-fiction book. It's very, very interesting, but also really troubling. So do check it out if you're into that kind of stuff, because that review should be coming soon as well. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Aditya Learns to Read. This is a new book review podcast by Discontent. If you like this podcast, check out some of our other stuff on our YouTube channel or on our podcast channels on Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher and Google Podcasts. And if you really like what we do, then you can support us through our Buy Me a Coffee page or through our YouTube memberships.